Oh, don't you love that? Um, okay, so I thought I'd open us up with something cheerful and fun. And we may have a guest join us. I don't know. He's asleep right now. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. The corn is as high as an elephant's eye, and it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Everybody, oh, what a beautiful morning! Oh, what a beautiful day! I've got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way. Do you hear him? He's down the hall. All the sounds of the earth are like music. All the sounds of the earth are like music. The breeze is so busy it don't miss a tree. And old weeping Willer is laughing at me. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way. Oh, what a beautiful day. He's a hoot. I love that dog. Okay, so you might have noticed, I know you're still laughing, and he didn't come by so you could see him, and I was not confident that if I picked up my computer, I wouldn't drop it, so you didn't get to see him yet. But so the title of my talk today is My Thoughts Wish They Were Prayers. Now, some of you may or may not know that that title has a connection to unity. There's a composer in the Unity Church in Springfield. We frequently sing a song that was written by a Unity music minister, and it's called Our Thoughts Are Prayers. Some of you know it. I'm going to read the words to you. It's wonderful. It's a little short thing. Our thoughts are prayers, and we are always praying. Our thoughts are prayers. Be careful what you're saying. Seek a higher consciousness, a state of peacefulness, and know that God is always there, and every thought becomes a prayer. Now, that is a magnificent idea, but I have to tell you, most of the time my thoughts are not prayers, especially, I don't know, there's just so much going on in our world these days. It's hard, isn't it, to keep a prayerful, at least it is for me. It's hard to keep a prayerful state of mind. I have to constantly try to corral my thoughts and make them more holy. So I want to share about a little tiny piece of the New Testament, this Christian scriptures, that you may never even have heard of. It literally, the translation of this particular, they always call them books in the Bible. They're not like books like this. They're not like books like something like that. Each segment of the Bible was written by different authors at different times from different locations. And so we have what we call our Bible. And there's a little one-page letter in the Christian scriptures written by the Apostle Paul. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that letter and about the Apostle Paul. I'm sure you've heard of the Apostle Paul, but I just think this is a remarkable story. So the name of that, quote, book is Philemon, Phillemon, not to be confused with Philippians, which is a much bigger letter that Paul also wrote. Now, Paul, I'm just going to assume you don't know much about Paul, so I'm going to give you the background. And and Neil, you're saying you don't. Is that what you're saying? You don't know. Okay, I'm just going to give you a very brief background, but it's really critical. Well, maybe all the scholars, I don't know, the people that are able to read original languages or the most ancient languages, almost, I think, unanimously say that without the Apostle Paul, we wouldn't have Christianity today because he was absolutely the primary moving factor of helping people learn about the risen Christ and of saying to the the new Christians, they didn't call themselves Christians at that time, but saying to them, all people, no matter who they are, no matter what their former teachings were, if they had no formal spiritual teachings, it doesn't matter. All people are embraced by the living God. Now, this went strongly against the teachings of the day for most synagogues and most of the rabbis. Paul was a Roman citizen, which gave him a huge amount of status. Unlike Jesus, who was an itinerant rabbi from a tiny little village that most people didn't have any respect for. And Jesus didn't have any social clout at all. But Paul, by virtue of being a Roman citizen, and by virtue of the fact that he was highly educated, formally educated in Greek and in the traditional what's the word I want? Traditional rabbinical teachings, Paul had a lot of clout and a lot of influence. And you may or may not remember that maybe 20 years or so after Jesus was crucified and resurrected, Paul was a violent oppressor of people that claimed that Jesus had been resurrected from the dead. He thought it was just bull hockey. This is ridiculous, and it's completely wrong to suggest such a thing. That's impossible. And so Paul was on a mission. Paul had had years of formal training in rabbinical studies. He was thinking he would become an Orthodox rabbi. And it took me a while to figure out, because I've always known about Paul. And I've always known that Paul had this terrifying incident happen to him at some point. He was on his way. He was very violent against people who were advocating the resurrection of the Christ. He was really a danger, and people were frightened of him, as they should have been. And he was on his way to persecute some more people that were followers of the risen Christ. Now remember, there weren't very many people that were of that mindset at that point, and they really had to practice in secret. They had to be very careful. And Paul was well known in they didn't call themselves Christians, they called themselves the Way with a capital W. And people knew Paul is dangerous, and he will do everything in his power to harm or cause the death of anybody that's claiming to be a follower of the Way, of the risen Christ. And he was on his way to do more damage to people, and he had a vision that was surely terrifying. He was on the road, and according to the scriptures, this massive blinding light surrounded him. And it was the force of the light and the surprise of it literally knocked him to the ground. And he heard a voice, a very distinct voice. that called him by his previous name, but we'll leave that alone. Paul, why are you persecuting me? Why are you persecuting me? And the voice said, I am Jesus. I am the risen Christ. Now, I don't know what else happened with that vision or who was with him, but he literally could not get himself up off the ground. He literally needed physical help from other people to go somewhere, into a village somewhere, and to get into somebody's home. And the scripture says he could not hear, could not see for a while. That was I don't know about you, but I'm really glad I never had a vision quite like that. But it changed his life, as you can imagine. And when he finally was able to speak again, he started asking for some guidance. He started trying to find somebody that knew something about the risen Christ, about the way. And he was led by the Holy Spirit to meet some people and to learn something about this, and to learn about the teachings of, he thought he knew the teachings of Jesus. That was part of the problem. He didn't get it. He heard the words, but he thought they were ridiculous, and he thought they completely were in opposition to the teachings of the ancient scriptures. Because here was this guy Jesus telling folks that you should love your enemy, telling folks that even if it's somebody that's from a tribe that your ancestors have hated their whole lives, you should try to get to know each other and respect each other. Telling folks that it might be okay on occasion for a man to speak to a woman. I mean, the teachings of Jesus were so antithetical to everything that Paul had been taught, and everything, honestly, that would have been in the Jewish scriptures of the day. And we know that Jesus, I mean, I hope you realize Jesus's teachings were so radical and seemed so heretical to so many people, because he just broke all the rules. Sure, it's okay to pick corn on the Sabbath if you're hungry. Okay, so Paul gets some guidance from some folks, and he starts becoming as enthusiastic, and that's a nice word. It really means in the spirit, in theos, in the spirit. Paul started becoming as enthusiastic to tell people about the risen Christ as he was enthusiastic before, as he was maniacal before, to tell people that this Jesus guy was a sham and anybody who believes in him should be killed. The complete opposite. And he's very vocal and very public in both cases, which shortly got him into a lot of trouble. Now I'm trying to give you basically the entire New Testament in 10 minutes. Because most of the New Testament is about Paul and the letters he wrote to all these people. Well, Paul got in a lot of trouble. The hierarchy, they didn't like this. They didn't like the fact that all of a sudden Paul changed his mind 180 degrees. They didn't like that he was no longer persecuting these crazy folks in the way. They didn't like that he was standing up for them, that he was trying to teach them, that he was trying to encourage them, that what they believed about the Holy Spirit about God, that what they believed was really the truth. Well, so you can imagine, as visible as he was and as vocal as he got into a lot of trouble. And over the course of his ministry, which was many years, he ended up in at least 3 different prisons. At least 5.5 to 6 years of his life was spent in prison. He was tortured for his opinions that were quite vocal, that went against the traditional beliefs. He was nearly killed several times. Eventually, this isn't even in the scriptures, but eventually, legend has it that he was beheaded for his teachings. Okay, there we finally got to it. The little book of Philemon, the one-page letter that Paul wrote to a friend of his, another wealthy, probably upstanding, traditionally practicing Jewish man. Paul wrote to Philemon to say, you know that I'm your friend. You know that I have some wealth. You know that you can trust me. And one of your slaves escaped from your property. His name is Onesimus. And I know that you know who he is. And he might have taken some food from you for his journey because he couldn't endure being a slave anymore. And he ran away from you. Now, the penalty for a runaway slave was fairly it was completely dependent on the slave owner, what they wanted to do. But they had full latitude. And if in fact the slave owner wanted to have the slave tortured and murdered, the slave owner had the authority to do that, which is just terrifying. So Onesimus had, at some point, while Paul was in one of these imprisonments under armed guard, probably with horrible, horrible living situation, probably dependent on somebody to bring him something to eat occasionally, dependent on somebody to maybe bathe his wounds if he was beaten or whipped. People that were imprisoned at that point usually didn't survive if they didn't have outside help. And that's still true, as you know, in some prisons in our world today. They didn't have somebody looking out for them, somebody helping them, somebody bringing them food, somebody helping take care of them. Onesimus had traveled a great distance. He escaped his slave owner, Philemon, and he had traveled a great distance and apparently was looking for Paul. He had heard about Paul, and he found Paul in whatever cave or shack or wherever he was that he was imprisoned. And Onesimus had been taking care of Paul for some time, and they had become really good friends. And Paul had talked to Onesimus about the living Christ. And Onesimus became a follower of the way under Paul's guidance. Now, Onesimus and Paul both knew that what Onesimus had done in perhaps stealing some food or some supplies for his journey and running away from his owner, that he was in great legal peril and that he was wrong. So Paul wrote this letter. I encourage you sometime to read this little one-page letter. It's beautiful. Paul wrote this beautiful letter to Philemon and begged him to let Onesimus come back so that Philemon would forgive him and receive him as a brother in Christ. And Paul continues, he says, and And if you would just let Onesimus stay with me, I would be so pleased because I really could use his help and his friendship. And he's meant so much to me. But if you can't see fit to let him stay with me now, please send him back to me at some point. Please free him of all of his obligations, and I will pay whatever debt is owed to you. And Paul says, I can do it. I've got the money. I will pay you whatever his debt is to you. Please send him back to me. I love this man as my own brother. And so this letter is just a masterpiece of grace and beauty and love and kindness. Now, we don't know exactly what happened to Onesimus, but there is indication in some of the scriptures, some of the other writings that probably aren't in our scriptures. There are indications that a man named Onesimus, which I don't know if that was a common name in that day, but I don't think so. A man named Onesimus was eventually appointed to be a bishop of some of the Christian congregations years later. And scholars think that's probably true, and that that Philemon really did forgive him his debt and send him on his way and enable Onesimus to become a teacher of the way and an example. Now, here's the thing about Paul, and here's where my message title comes in. My thoughts wish they were prayers. I studied a lot about Paul and what he went through, and his letters are filled with grace and beauty and love and forgiveness and gratitude. Not all of them. There's some scolding sentiments in there to some of the new Christians that were not treating people in a Christly way. But many of the letters are filled with love and joy. And I'm thinking, how did Paul, who had suffered so much because of his faith in a loving God, how did he do that? How did he continue to maintain the spirit of gratitude and faith? And that's part of why I think Paul became the ultimate exemplar of the Christian faith, because he really lived that and he really believed it. And his mind was completely and permanently changed from one of vengeance and violence to gratitude and joy and love. Now, I don't know exactly how he did that, but he's certainly an example for us to consider. And I think about some of the other people in our own era, in our own world, who've experienced horrors, and they've managed to come through it with dignity and respect for others. I think about Viktor Frankl. If you've read his amazing book, Man's Search for Meaning, he and his young wife were imprisoned at Dachau, I think, and his wife died, and he was a psychiatrist, I believe, and after he was freed from the concentration camp, he had all along, the whole time he was in there for years, he was observing people as a psychiatrist would do, and he realized that the people that didn't just physically survive, but the people that weren't completely destroyed emotionally and spiritually, the people that survived in all ways, It wasn't that their situation was any better or different from other people in the concentration camp. It was how they thought about things. And he wrote this magnificent book, Man's Search for Meaning, about that. How we think about things when they're tough. And like I said, my thoughts wish they were prayers, but they're not most of the time. And I think about the Dalai Lama, who led so many of his people from torture and terror under great dangers and penalties. And he still, if you've read any of his works, his being, you can practically, when you're reading the page, you can practically see the holiness shining through and the joy. And there's many people in our world that have managed to navigate through horrible stuff and still come out on the other side, offering respect and dignity and love to other people, even though it logically it seems like they shouldn't be able to do that or even want to do it. And I just pray that I and that you and that others can somehow search for that our thoughts become our prayers. And I want to close with one of Paul's, I think, one of the most beautiful passages of scripture in the entire Bible, from the 8th chapter of Romans. I believe that neither death, nor life, nor imprisonment, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will ever be able to separate me from the love of God. And that's my prayer. Amen.
Thank you, Linda. I think unity was one of the first places I heard that, our thoughts are prayers. There was a book, I can't remember his name now, but you'll see it when you believe it. I think a lot of you have read that book. Very famous writer, but
Wayne Dwyer.
Wayne Dwyer, right? Yeah, wow. And I know that in unity we also talk about emotion, because emotion is motion and energy, and anything you give your energy to becomes a prayer in your thoughts. So I think Dwyer's context was what you really want in life you get. What you really don't want in life you get. So emotion is incredible. And on a side note, I think recently I saw a movie about Paul. Not the Paul you're thinking of, though, because in this movie he was depicted as a small Elian Gray stand-up comic. Anybody remember the movie Paul? Yeah, I saw that a couple of days ago. It would be kind of humorous to catch that if you look it up, Google it, and see if you can catch the movie. It was really funny. But unmute your screens and share, and we'll keep the recording going just for a short period, and then we'll get into the rest of our service. So, comments? Anyone? But you have to unmute. That's one of the laws of this program. Wow, all these comments. I mean, let me pick one of the
Yeah,
top, please.
I appreciate listening to you so much. When I wasn't really raised in any religion, my mother was spiritual. My father vacillated between being agnostic, atheist, a little bit of everything. They had both been raised religious and given it up. And so as a child, I wasn't taken to Sunday school. We did not have a Bible in the house. It was, you know, that kind of an environment. And I listened to you and I just learned so much. And it makes me so happy every time you're here because I think you're filling in on the knowledge base that I just never got. And I really do appreciate it and thank you for that.
Thanks, Pam. I, in the last, I don't know, few years, since I've become affiliated and love Unity and have been doing more, I used to call it preaching, but doing more of that in several, I just go from the assumption, and I know this may sound odd, that the people don't know much about, because frequently, and I know a lot about the history and the church and the Bible, but there's still so many things that are confusing, and there's so many people, so many characters that you hear about in so many different time zones, and I get confused, and I've done the studying. And so I just assume that people don't know or remember some of this stuff. And so I try to start over, and I hope that doesn't insult anybody, but I, I have heard many sermons that I wish they would have done that. Remind me of some of this stuff that I've gotten all confused about. So thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
Can you tell us the verses of Romans that are so powerful? More or less.
Yes, it's the last verse, I think, of the 8th chapter of Romans. But just a minute, I'll look that up for you. And Romans, by the way, was another letter that Paul wrote, surprisingly, to the Christians in Rome. Isn't that clever how they titled it that?
I thought it was the letters of the Ephesians that was so powerful.
That's also very powerful. There's lots of letters that are powerful. Okay, it's the last few verses of Romans 8, beginning with verse 37. I think that's a 3.
I'll read the whole thing.
37 to 39. Romans 8, 37 to 39.
Somebody else before we close the recording? Yes, Jeff.
Linda, most of what you talk about is kind of like, for me, the first time. I mean, I really pretty uneducated, I guess, about the Bible, but the one thing that I really love is your dog. When your dog is singing with you, it brings me really grounded. That dog is pretty smart. So you're probably somebody to listen to because you're pretty smart. But thank you for the duo participation. Love it.
You're welcome. You know, sometimes if the message is rather somber and it just doesn't seem right to have him sing along, but
This was very appropriate, and we finally got both of you together in a recording, which I've been hoping to do for some time.
oh my goodness, you're right. I forgot about that.
Anyone else? Jody?
Yeah, I'm trying to put my thoughts together. Yes, I love to hear people talk about Paul. Over the years, he's become, just important to me. I can always find a verse, mostly in the ones attributed to him. Some of them they say he did right, but he didn't
Right.
really. But
Right.
And it always bothered me that some people will avoid reading anything if that's something Paul said, because they think he didn't like women, or he didn't like certain people, or that sort of thing. Some of the things that people attribute as the bad stuff about Christianity come from some of those writings, and it always saddened me that people were choosing to focus on some of those things and missed all the other, as you said, beauty that was there. So I always appreciate anybody talking about Paul, and particularly this letter is not something you hear a lot about, and that it, like
No.
you said, it encapsulates a lot of the teaching that, and it'd be so neat to really know what happened to this man later in life, and to be sure, because that would just be the icing on the cake, so to speak. So thank you so much, and thank you for giving of your time after your long trip and everything. And I too loved hearing your dog, and I'm glad it's recorded. I can go back and listen to it again.
That's funny.
Mhm,
Thank you, Jody.
mhm.
Yeah, and he knew some of the words too, if you noticed.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
well,
was in there
listen,
quite a bit. Yeah.
you don't even know. I've got him recorded singing French. He's really smart.
Wow. Yeah, and that movie that Zach caught, Paul, I think it was inappropriate to show a little gray alien liking to as a smoker, but that's you just have to catch the movie.
Yeah.
Okay, going once, going
Uh,
twice.
I'd like to ask Linda, from your knowledge of your reading of the writings of Paul, I've heard the accusation that without Paul, women would have been much more powerful in the Christian faith because they were very strong in the followers of the way.
So I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you saying Paul enabled the women, or Paul?
Disabled the women.
No, no, I disagree with that. And what Jody was saying is very true. There are a number of passages of scripture, especially in the letters, that are attributed to Paul that he probably did not write. And some of those really demeaning passages about women, he probably did not, and I really believe he did not write those. Or because it was really common in that time, it was really common in that time if a person of some respect and influence had disciples, like Jesus had disciples and Paul had disciples, if if any of the disciples of that being thought they knew enough about that person's thinking and teaching, it was okay for somebody else to write it and list it as being the author of their teacher, even though that wasn't the case. And in fact, I think just the opposite, Bob. I think Paul understood more of what Jesus was saying, because Jesus was absolutely enabling women to come into their own and to be full-fledged disciples. And if you read through the passages in the letters over and over and over again in the letters, Paul thanks people by name. And so many of those people that he thanks and sends his love and prayers to are women. And many of them also are former slaves. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know, because he was so appreciative of the people that had enabled not just the ministry that he did, but enabled the word about the risen Christ. And many of them were women.
And in Ephesians 5, they talk about man is the head of the household, and all of the domination of women seems to be based on that passage. And later in 28, 29 of Ephesians chapter 5, it talks about, but Jesus was also the head of the church. The family of followers were his family, and he held them in high esteem, so that he is blamed for the man as the head of the household, and the women are able to be treated as unimportant, except we know they do birth children. I mean,
Mhm.
what a great gift they have, the ability to produce my son.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, part of it was we don't know exactly, but
Gloria's battery's running out. I'm feeling like with uh Paul tried to talk to people that were Gentiles, right? And
right.
I think he tried to um keep in mind things that they already thought.
Right.
So he would use like analogies and stuff. And I think that maybe, people I might say I defend him too much, but I think maybe he was saying man is the head of the household because that's what people thought then. And so you can say, so just like that relationship and that family is also a relationship, with Christ and that family, he also said that, men should treat their wives well. He didn't say, you're the head, you can do whatever you want, And so I think in the context of him trying to relate to people that this was new to, surely he did it with a lot of the talking to Greeks and, where he was kind of taking their philosophical viewpoints and stuff and kind of using that to explain what he wanted to say. And it's just so easy for people to say, oh, well, look, it says that right there. So I'm not going to be a Christian because, they don't believe in, women should have any power. On the other hand, there are people that take that one passage and say, aha, it's God said, this. And so therefore, we're going to keep
That's
women
right.
down, so anything can be used and abused. But I do think that I agree with you, Linda, that he, that it's obvious in his ministry. And my understanding is that women funded a lot of
Yes,
his
that's
churches.
correct.
Wealthy
correct.
women funded a lot of stuff for him. And, so I kind of take it as, that's probably we've whatever the word is, we've given too much emphasis to those passages.
Well, but I do think what happened is that maybe some people in history that have had less totally beneficent views than Paul have taken Paul and twisted him around and
Mhm.
had him as the basis of some stuff.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's even in the war, the war, that shows how old I am. In World War II, they dropped pamphlets down in Germany using quotes from Paul that you should, wasn't it? They were to follow your leader.
Hmm.
On this earth, you should follow whoever's in charge because God put him there for a purpose.
So a lot of people
And
have
so,
been
there's you can abuse anything if you don't study it, I think.
the tradition of misunderstanding, and it's just as long as the tradition of him being right.
That's right. The tradition of misunderstanding. That's a good way to call it. Anyway, I didn't mean to go on, but
No,
this
that's good.
it's a good conversation to actually record too, because this is like the way we were when we were together. We'd have these conversations over some of Gloria's cookies and cake or
yeah.
Alan's pies. So this is all good. So I'm
And
going
Pam's-
to,
Mhm.
Ham's
Yes.
beautiful chocolate chip cookies.
oh my God, yes, that's right. You're the chocolate chip lady, and we,
And then we finish off Jeff's chicken.
and Jeff's chicken. Oh my God, nostalgic. We're getting very all right. So let's stop the recording, and we could talk freely amongst ourselves with anything else that doesn't is inappropriate for Zoom.
Mhm.
So hold on.